All right, my friends, welcome to 120 Months. My name is David Parsons. This is a show where we are cruising through the music of the 1990s month by month. I am very happy to have a special guest with me today. His name is Jacob Givens. If you are on the internet at all, you may have seen his face. He makes wonderful videos in which he provides a sort of a depiction of the visceral feeling of what it was like to listen to music in the 1990s. But Jacob is also a writer and musician and actor. You can kind of tell all of that stuff. Very talented dude from these videos. But he has a podcast called Waterproof Records where he's talking about 90s music. Go check that out. It is excellent. And also, I have to mention, I'm jealous of his cover band, which has got a great title. It's called, a great name called Temple of the Dads, in which he and some other dads are doing 90s covers. And I just saw you. Hi, Jacob. How are you? Good to see you.
Hi, David.
Yeah.
So happy to be here. That was a great setup. I need to borrow all of that you described of my career because I was like,
Yeah.
this is pretty spot on. It's great.
Gotta list the resume.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, I just saw you do Serve the Servants,
I think it was heart-shaped box.
heart-shaped box. You're
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
it was great, dude. You guys
Did
are
it sound all
awesome.
right? Sound all
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that was at the Redwoods downtown LA. I'd gotten some clips of our show that was in July, I think, actually. And I knew we had a gig coming up, and I was like, I'll just drop one of our prior shows to kind of encourage people to come out to the new one. And then this last Friday, we just played Rock and Roll Pizza in Simi Valley, and it was an amazing show. It's in a bowling alley, and it's like a bar that's there. But like Dave Grohl and Taylor Hawkins played on that stage with Chevy Metal, their little side project. So it's had some cool drop-ins, and they have this amazing stage with fog machine and lights. So it was really like, we've played bars where we're just kind of like on the ground with our own PA, roughing it. And then when you play a thing like that, you've got a sound guy who's making sure your vocals are coming through, all the levels are set. So it was a really enjoyable show. It was a lot of fun.
That is very, very cool. And now I have to share a 90s memory that you may appreciate, which was seeing Ben Folds 5 at a bowling alley in
Oh, that's
Eagle
awesome.
Rock. They did an event where you could bowl with Ben Folds 5, and they were bowling there. It was so random. There were so many people there. That was kind of like at the height of
Oh.
their thing.
That
I
is
was
amazing. They
Yeah.
need to bring more bowling with musicians back, but I feel like they chose really wisely because bowling with Ben Folds rolls off the tongue and you believe it. Like I
Yeah.
don't believe bowling with Maynard James Keenan. That's probably not a thing that existed at any point in time.
We're gonna now
Um,
look up that he's just like an avid
an
bowler.
avid
Yeah,
bowler.
it's a 300 every time. Well, I'm wondering actually. I wanted to talk with you about Jeff Buckley and what we can get to the Buckley business. I hope you have some Kleenex nearby. 'Cause we're gonna cry through the
I
Jeff
am
Buckley
ready
stuff.
for all the emotion. I prepared all day, saved up my tears.
Do you guys do any Jeff Buckley covers? Would you attempt something like that?
I couldn't even imagine. The sad thing is in my young buck years, when I was a young lad in my 20s and even early 30s, I had a pretty solid falsetto, and I probably could have taken on, I probably could have done maybe a last goodbye, something that was more the radio friendly. I probably would not have done it anywhere near as justice, but I would have been able to. But somewhere along the way, in my late 30s, early 40s, I lost my falsetto, call it snoring, call it old manness, or whatever it is. But I just can't do those things anymore. So I can't imagine I'd have any way to do any tribute to Jeff Buckley. I wish I could.
You could do like a William Shatner talk sing thing where you kind
Right.
of like smoke a cigarette
Right.
and
Kiss me,
yeah.
please kiss me. Richard Cheese, do it like
Yeah.
Richard Cheese.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
totally.
there we go. There we go.
The lounge covers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I saw a video you posted. It must have been a couple weeks ago when the documentary was in theaters. I don't know if it's still in theaters.
I don't know either.
The movie is called "It's Never Over." Jeff Buckley,
Hmm.
directed by Amy Berg. I watched it this weekend. It's so intense. It's like it's a. So I want to hear your thoughts, but the documentary is I thought it was such a gift because it was like I've always known the Jeff Buckley story bits and pieces, but I'd never seen so much of him and sort of put it all together. And it was a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, it was absolutely the first time that I felt everything I ever knew about him string together in the story. I finally got to see the full piece from childhood to death, and then after. It really was what an incredible piece to not only get to see his talent, but to get to hear from his own mother and from those that have loved him and his relationships. So much more about him outside of what we would be told through a Rolling Stone article or an MTV clip or anything. We really got to see what he was like, the funny, the smiles, the playfulness. And when you get to see somebody's life like that, it wrecks you all the more,
Yeah.
because you're just like, I'm starting to understand who he was in this very limited format. But yeah, absolutely an incredible documentary, and I was a wreck when it was over, and
Yeah.
it was all due to the last 5 minutes. It was literally like I had kept it together the whole film, and I won't spoil it for your audience, but it was the last 5 minutes that there was just one thing that happened, and like a dam, it just went psh, and it was
Yeah.
over. It was
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. It reminded me of there's a documentary about Elliott Smith, where a similar figure in some ways.
Absolutely, I love
Yeah.
Elliott Smith, and I don't believe I've seen that documentary.
Yeah, well, like this one, it sort of humanizes someone who is kind of a mythic creature in some
Hmm.
ways, and the human element is what makes it so much more intense. I mean, you find out, yeah, that he's not just this performer, but someone who had flaws and struggled and was, yeah, a funny guy too. That's what comes out. You should watch the Elliott Smith one because he
I
comes out
definitely
as a
will.
funny guy in all
Yeah,
this. And you're like, you don't really think of him as like a barrel of yucks with
totally.
Elliott Smith.
No,
But
and
yeah,
you don't think that about Jeff either. These guys, they are icons, and they represent the power and the dramatic nature of their music, and so you don't ever get to see that lighthearted side. So yeah, I can imagine seeing Elliott Smith be funny would be like, huh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah. That's what all his friends are like. I wish people knew that he was a funny guy, that he
yeah,
wasn't just the sort of the character he played in his albums. But
yeah,
I wonder, since you're someone who thinks so much, obviously, about '90s music,
hmm,
and '90s rock and roll in particular, I wonder where Jeff Buckley fits in that trajectory for you, because I mean, first of all, did you listen to Jeff Buckley in the '90s? When did you
I
discover
did.
him? Yeah.
I did. I feel very lucky because there was even when I made my video, which I mean, I made it a couple years ago and I brought it back because of, whether it's a Jeff anniversary or I was trying to help promote the documentary. But I remember one of the times I posted it a year or so ago, this guy in the comments was kind of implying that there was no way I knew about him in '94. Like that was what he was getting at. And I can honestly tell you, I felt very lucky to have stumbled upon the Last Goodbye video on MTV, because I found out years later, I believe Grace was released as a single before Last Goodbye. I had never seen that, but I saw Last Goodbye. I was really moved by the video, and even though I it was a rock alternative grungy guy, I also am a theater boy. And so in my case logic, here was Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Smashing Pumpkins, and in my case logic over here was the original cast recording of Chess and Assassins by Stephen Sondheim and Into the Woods. So I had a flair for the theatrical, and you cannot deny hearing Jeff Buckley sing for the first time. You're kind of like, what? This vibrato, this range, this skill. And so I saw that video for Last Goodbye. I was smitten instantly, and I went out to the mall, and I bought that album and brought it home, and actually was kind of puzzled from the first few notes of Mojo Pen starting off. I was like, where are we going with this? So I didn't know what to expect from him as an artist, but I was an instant fan when it came out.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's like it feels like even just in the wider popular culture, Jeff Buckley was an acquired taste. Like
Yeah.
when that album came out, it didn't it wasn't like a number one record in the US. It was popular, I think, more so in Europe. This is all from the documentary.
Right.
I was learning
Yeah, me too.
throughout. But yeah, obviously now this album is considered one of the best albums of all time.
Oh yeah.
Hallelujah reached sort of super mega status at some
Mhm.
point, where everybody knows that song. I feel like his version is the definitive version of
100%.
Leonard Cohen's song. And there's something about the album that's just sort of, it took me a minute, I think, when I first
Yeah.
got into it. I think I appreciate it just like everyone else more and more
Yeah.
the more I listen to it, if that makes sense. It wasn't
Yeah.
instantaneous to me.
Yeah, I completely understand that as well. And there were aspects of, I'm sitting there as a teenager and you're going through and the easy ones, Grace and Last Goodbye and Lover You Should Have Come Over is my favorite song of all time of his. But then you get to Corpus Christi Carol, you get to these it's like medieval hymn and Lilac Wine, and these are all these things that for those who were living in New York and seeing him perform live, they got it immediately, right? Because when you watch the documentary, I'm sure you had a moment like I did, which was when you see that, you get him before like, if you were to have been at one of those shows and then that album came out, you would have been like, I understand everything that Jeff is. But for those of us living in other parts of the country who are only relying on the radio and MTV, you're just getting a glimpse. And the first glimpse we get of Jeff Buckley is a guy who looks like he could be on Beverly Hills 90210. He's very model-esque, handsome with his hair and his brooding, pouty lips. And then he's got this really kind of, otherworldly singing voice. And yeah, it's very poppy. It's not necessarily rocky at all. And so it was one of those things that I was really grateful that maybe I was just going through between girlfriends at the time and I was feeling sappy enough that when I had it, it did click the thing. But whenever anybody says to me, oh, I'm just now really kind of catching on, I'm like, well, I feel like the entire planet 20, 30 years later is he's finally getting his flowers, as they say, right?
That makes a lot of sense to me, Jacob, because you're a person who obviously reacts to music on a very emotional level, right? That like
Yes.
you have a and I love this about you is that you have an openness to music that it just hits you the way it hits you, and then
Yeah.
you're good at communicating that in these viral videos. And that's why, I mean, it might be a trite thing to say, but that is why they're viral, I think, is
I
because
think so
other
too.
people feel that way as well. But I think that's probably key to why you liked or why you reacted to Buckley
Hmm.
immediately was that element of you, if that makes
I
sense. You're
a
emotionally
hundred
open.
percent. I
Yeah.
was emotionally and everything about my life has been like that. And when people come in the comments and they say, look, this song is better than that song or this band is better than that band, I'm always like, that is completely undefinable when you're talking about on an individual level, because an album or a song or an artist can hit somebody emotionally and you can't, somebody could literally have that kind of visceral reaction to a band that you hate, but that's just how it can be. And
Mm.
my videos, these emotional reactions, I didn't know it was going to work, and I didn't know that my sense of humor and my sense of kind of how to be a performer would come through and that it would resonate for people. But I'm so happy that it has
Mm.
because it's just opened up dialogue and feelings and reactions and memories about songs. But I think sometimes we can forget what we felt when we were 13, 14, 15, because we react to music very differently the older you get. But when you're young, it's just kind of hitting you
Yeah.
in such a specific way, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure. And
Yeah.
it builds, that's what builds the nostalgic chords inside you too. So that
Yeah.
when you hear those songs later,
Yeah.
for me, there's actually a Smurfs album that came out in the early 80s that I
Yeah.
used to listen to on the floor while I was at my parents' house with the Fisher Price record player, and there was
Yeah.
a song on there about going to sleep that there's a very like down tempo, like a Smurf ballad, really.
Yeah.
And I just cried so much when I listened to that song and I was like, 6 years old. I swear if I heard that song now, I would be like you at the end of the Buckley documentary, just a total, wreck. And you can't control that.
You can't control that. That is very real. I'm so glad you shared that. Thank you for sharing that. That is so real. And I don't think we, like a person who's in their teens or their 20s right now might look at the way that we are communicating about our youth and our childhood and be like, let it go. Geez, whatever. But I dare them when they're our age, when something shows up from their youth, I dare them like try not to emotionally respond. That's just the nature of getting older and really looking back at, and fondly, sadly, and you have no control over being sent back in time because of a piece of art or music or a story or a smell, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah.
This is a safe place for these kinds of
Yeah,
discussions.
good, good,
For
good.
older men remembering the things that made them cry.
Good,
But
good,
yeah, I
good.
mean, Ben Folds Five, Jesus, those were my breakup songs.
I was
I
big
love
into
that stuff.
him. I was
Yeah,
big into him, and I mean, of the five, the three guys, Robert Sledge and Ben Folds, and I'm drawing a blank on the other
is it
fella,
Darren Jesse?
Darren Jesse.
Yeah.
I had the first album because I saw Philosophy on 120 Minutes, and I thought, what is this weird? I always described them as the Peanuts gang grown up. That's what it sounded like to me. It was like the Peanuts gang.
Yeah.
And I loved that band, but man, they could really hit you hard with those slower ballads on those albums when you wanted to really,
Yep.
selfless, cold, and
Oh
composed. And
God. Yeah.
you could just sit there and just be like, oh, God,
100%. Yeah.
brick.
Okay, I'm done talking about this now, Jacob. I don't want to go to that place.
Okay, 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 okay.
I'm
You're
just
right. You're right.
kidding.
You're right.
Um,
You're right.
no, but thinking about Jeff Buckley, so I didn't really listen to Buckley in the '90s. I caught up with him probably in the 2000s at some point, and like I said, my appreciation has only grown. But part of that appreciation, I think, is seeing how he was sort of singular. Like that album doesn't sound like a lot of other stuff in the '90s. You mentioned all the like, when people think about '90s music, they think about Alice in Chains and Tool and Nirvana and that sort of stuff. But Buckley's was doing something a little bit
Totally.
different, and
Yeah.
it's connected, I think, to, and this took me a while to appreciate too, like the whole like New York art scene that they describe in the documentary, where there's like this downtown thing going on. You have to sort of, I don't know, be into the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed and know a little bit of where this guy is coming from. I mean, you don't have to know those things, but I think knowing them and appreciating that type of music has made me appreciate Buckley's stuff a lot more because of what
Mhm.
he was combining. It doesn't feel like a lot of those other artists were really drawing from the same influences he was. If that
Not at
makes sense.
all. And
Yeah.
yeah, that the documentary really helped shine a light on that because here you've got this debut album where seven songs are originals and three are covers. And live at Chennai and everything that he was doing, like they talked about in the movie, is he was kind of like afraid once he got a record deal because he'd mastered the art of the cover. And so here's this kid who's growing up with just a mom. And I think about my mom. And I think about like the music that she played for me that would not have been cool music, right? She would have been playing me like, here's this great song by Billy Joel or ABBA or maybe the Beatles before they were on drugs or a little Willie Nelson or Patsy Cline or Buddy Holly. That's what my mom was playing when she's cooking in the kitchen and I'm just like sitting on the floor, right? Well, Buckley somehow like heard Nina Simone and these songs that his mom was playing, and instead of like being a kid with a guitar, when he's a teenager, sure, he's playing the heavy stuff and in the rock bands, but he gets on a guitar and he's like, what if I cover this 1950s jazz number that my mom used to play in the house?
Mm,
And who was doing that? No one.
yeah.
Every artist I meet who was coming up in the 90s, you ask them, hey, what was your big album? They're like, it's literally like it's starting to get to be like the same 10 albums. It's literally like the Kiss, Rush, they're
Yeah.
all citing Sabbath, Zeppelin. It's always these same big, heavy, hard rock albums that were redefining what it meant to just be a performer and be on stage with explosions. And here you've got this 90s soft, gentle, artsy spirit, and he's channeling the stuff that his mom played,
Right.
So
Yeah.
What
It
a unique thing.
it would have been Wilson Phillips for me, is what my mom was playing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Wilson Phillips.
Yeah.
Someday somebody's gonna
Dude,
turn
it's
around.
catchy stuff.
Totally.
I have a soft spot for Billy Joel. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
think honestly, Billy Joel is what led to Ben Folds 5. It's just like, oh,
Oh
this is
yeah.
Billy Joel for me,
Oh yeah.
like with a younger punker sort of sensibility.
Yeah.
I love the something about the piano pop.
Oh, Piano Pop
So
is great,
nice.
and I'm a huge Billy Joel fan as well. And that's what I loved about Ben Folds. I know this episode isn't about him, but yeah, he would do some he could do some crazy stuff, like he would do things as if he was like Eddie Van Halen on a piano,
Yeah.
right? With the way he was like just going crazy on it. So,
Yeah, obviously we're thinking about the 90s as a sort of musical moment, and the more I get into these months where we're sort of listening to all of the music that came out in the 90s and not just because I think that what you mentioned with the 70s, that Rush, Pink Floyd, all these big bands that people name, it's the same thing happens with the 90s. Yeah,
right.
people reduce it to like the 10 bands.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. They go Pearl Jam, Nirvana, all the T-shirts that are on the kids, the ones that rose to the top, and you go, there was a lot going on. There was
Yeah.
a lot going on.
Yeah, and one of the things that this documentary about Jeff Buckley reminded me of was the fact that there was sort of he was maybe an early adopter to this, but like Nina Simone and Billie Holiday and the kind of like jazzy lounge stuff had a moment in the 90s. I mean, I was a West Coast ska swing guy because I graduated from high school in the middle of the 1990s.
Yeah,
Big Bad Voodoo Daddy is from my town. They played
totally.
our high school graduation. But you remember that? You remember how big, like, I mean, even the Rat Pack were big during this
Huge,
era. Yeah.
huge. And really, you have films like Swingers to thank. You have this phenomenon where people were wearing wallet chains and zoot suits and suspenders, and it was just all of a sudden for a couple years there, swing, big band, because ska was a little bit of its own thing, but you would see it get moved, and there was like more just like straightforward jazz bands, and like
Yeah.
they were, you had what's the one who had the Squirrel Nut Zippers?
Love
You
them.
had,
So
they had
good.
Hell, and then there was so many during that time that yeah, we did almost go back in time and revert and be like, yeah, let's just go back to the way things were in the 30s and 40s all of a sudden. It was crazy.
But Buckley is the only guy I can think of that was like, you know what? I'm gonna like do a Nina Simone thing. I mean, there's a quality to his voice
Oh yeah.
that at times I feel like I'm listening to like a diva or a female soloist from that
Hmm.
era,
Hmm.
but combined with Robert Plant and
Yeah,
combined, I mean, he had a range that's just I think that what the documentary did for me is show me how singular a character he was. I can't
absolutely.
really compare him, and that's really interesting because he hated comparison, right? He
Hmm.
was like, "Don't compare me to anybody, especially
Especially
my
my
dad."
dad.
Yep. And we can talk about his dad in a second, but
Yeah.
I think that part of it is interesting because he's someone who clearly soaked up a lot of influences from the whole of like 20th century music history
Hmm.
and gave it back to you in a way that didn't feel derivative, which
Yeah.
I think I think that's a tricky thing to do, to
Hmm.
not be like, oh, this guy's just ripping off someone.
Totally.
Instead, it seems like he like ate it all up and then produced something new.
Yeah, and also comes from this is one of the best gifts you can have is limited access to um, the skills of others to create your art. And what I mean by that is like he was just him and a guitar. Really when you have a talent, a good voice, and you can play music, but you don't have a drummer in your back pocket, you don't have a bassist, you don't have the people around you to make a lot of stuff. You kind of have to simplify it and bring it down to its most basic element. So if you're wanting to do, oh, I'd love to do a great Zeppelin cover, or I'd love to do a really cool interpretation of this. All he could do was do it on the guitar and his voice. And so that lends itself to becoming such a singular thing that every single thing that he does is like, that is the most Jeff Buckley way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Um, yeah, I really have a hard time thinking of other artists that are like him in the 90s in particular. And I think that's part of why he didn't hit very hard because it was hard to slot him in. I mean, I'm surprised that he was on MTV even.
Hmm.
Because I mean, I guess there are some songs that have a little they have a rock to them.
Yeah,
Later in the album, it gets a little harder and
yeah,
there's an edge to what he's doing, but it's weird stuff.
yeah. Yeah, Last Goodbye to me is the one that, so Grace, of course, is, that's the one I made the video about, but Grace is incredible because the way it finishes, like it
Yeah.
gets so dramatic at the end. But Last Goodbye was very accessible because that falsetto, that kiss me, please kiss me, that was on par with a lot of other, like, these are radio friendly type things, but it wasn't rock and roll. And again, I think that, I mean, it wasn't what else was on the radio. For, like, if
Yeah.
you were turning on to an alternative station, if you heard that, you might be turned off from it, right? Because you'd be like, well, that's not the kind of music I'd want. And then it wasn't soft enough to be played on more contemporary radio. So it really was in no man's land. But for some reason in Europe and in Australia, I think they were like, hell yeah, more of this, please. And it just
Right.
didn't resonate in the United States. And it took people coming out over and over again to say, no, hearing Chris Cornell say it was his favorite, Jimmy Page say it's his favorite, hear Brad Pitt on a set going, it's my favorite. People were like, who, and that's
Hmm.
been going on since like 2004.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I hadn't heard that David Bowie said that this was the greatest album ever made. I was
right.
like, that's all
So
I need.
I was like, literally every great artist that had such a high regard for him and his talent. And the way that he died in 97, I was a senior in high school. And I mean, I remember when it was on MTV News, and I was like, oh man. And no one in my school was like, they were like, I don't know who that is. And I'm like, well, he was a
Yeah.
great singer. He's a really great singer.
Kind of a
So
cult figure at that
kind of a
point.
cult figure. Yeah.
What part of me was really struck by the very amorphous masculinity that this guy presented as.
Hmm.
And that's partly what I mean as different from the kind of like rock dude that
Totally.
was dominating the airwaves. And that, I mean, Cobain was someone who engaged with gender in a really overt way as well. But even Cobain's voice, though, sounds,
Yeah.
like just hard as hell,
Yeah. Yeah.
Buckley had a vulnerability about him that was, I think it feels like it was explicit that he was, and I can't help thinking that's part of why he didn't quite fit in
Mhm.
a slot in the 90s is because he didn't inhabit a particularly recognizable form of masculinity, if that makes sense.
Agreed 100%, because the thing about Cobain is, well, he was not afraid. Everything that he did, like dress, his makeup, kiss another man, all of it felt very punk ethos,
Yeah.
which was aggressive, right? So that's aggressive nonconformity. I'm going to take the thing that you're uncomfortable with and I'm going to push it in your face. But the one thing you can't deny about Jeff Buckley is tenderness. Some men have tenderness, and that is a trait that we are taught from a very young age to not have, and to be tough and be strong and face the bullies. But a boy who doesn't have a father, has a stepfather, but has these issues about a man not wanting to be around him and really being so close to his mother. And again, this isn't a spoiler, but you hear in the voicemails to his mom, such a soft, gentle boy.
Yeah.
And that is like, I have a tenderness in me as well that makes me emotional. And as you see in my videos, I'm very emotional as well. But you really see in this film, you go, he had he had the sexual drive of a male who, loves women and loves beauty, but he had such a gentle nature about him as well. And what does the world do with that when you're in the
Yeah.
public eye? How do you respond? How do you react? And that's really so much of why this is a tragic story.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it is. It's super sad. I mean, the story is really super sad. And the way that he died is so haunting in so
It's
many
so
ways.
haunting because it doesn't make any sense. And I mean, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? It's like, it's probably not suicide, but at the same time, it feels like it could be. But there's really no definitive answer to just disappear and then turn up. And all signs saying like, well, I think he was happy. I think he was doing okay. But then, you go, well, it hadn't been all rosy leading up to that moment either. So there's a lot of confusing things about the human condition, but to go that way, it feels like we'll never know what really happened, and that breaks your heart even more.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, the connection to his dad too, because
Oh
his
God,
dad died in so they didn't cover it in the movie, but his dad died of a
drug
heroin
overdose.
overdose in a really strange way. Like his friends said, he wasn't that much of a heroin guy, and he sort of just one night just took a whole bunch, and that was that.
Yeah.
And it was sort of God, the way that he met his dad just like a couple months uh before his dad died, all of that, I didn't know any of that story, and it adds a dimension, and I think connects definitely to the softness of
Yeah.
him. His
Yeah.
dad, I mean, his dad, I don't know, have you listened to Tim Buckley's music?
I have, and every time, he comes up in my post, because whenever you talk about Jeff, people are like, "Oh, you need to go check out the dad." And I do think he was great. Again, it never landed in my lap as a youth, right? So it's like I listen to it now, like somebody would be like, "Have you ever really spent any time with, you know, an artist catalogs you've never heard before?" And so you
Yeah.
can listen to it with like, "Oh, it's very nice," but I don't have emotional connections to it. But it is very good.
Yeah, that one song, I think it's "Once I Was a Lover"
Yeah,
is the song that he broke his string while he was singing
right.
at the in the East Village at or no, I think it was in Brooklyn actually at that first show.
Eh,
Um,
yeah, yeah, I think
and
so.
that song was featured in this movie Coming Home with Jane Fonda and John Voight, I think, about the Vietnam War, and it was like one of the first like Vietnam War veteran movies.
Hmm.
And it's a really bittersweet song, but the chorus of it is, sometimes I wonder, will you remember me? And the fact that Jeff Buckley, the son, sings that song a cappella after his string breaks, and it's his first public performance, and he's singing his father's song, who died at a young age, saying, "Will you remember me?" It's just so much pathos to it. It's almost impossible to take.
It's absolutely impossible. Yeah, that's St. Anne's. That's the
That's
tribute
right.
to the father.
Yeah.
That is one of those performances, and one of the craziest, or a quote that comes from that I've always remembered, is that Jeff said, "My father sacrificed fatherhood for the music, for the fame, and I sacrificed my anonymity for my father."
Ugh.
So
Yeah.
he came forward in the light, and showed the world, yes, I am his son. And yes, this is what my talent is. And up until that point, he was still kind of anonymous and just living this bohemian artist lifestyle, a guy who writes music, a guy who's playing. But that was really okay. Well, now for the sake of my father's death, I'm going to let everybody know who I am. And in the end, is that the thing that, look, we have the gift of his music, but was could he be able to take that public life? And we don't know.
Yeah. I mean, what did you think about that element of it? Because it struck me that this was a connection to Kurt Cobain too, and so many others. Is this sort of discomfort with being famous,
Yeah,
even though they had sort of sought it out a little bit.
yeah,
And then it's funny because I think it connects to the masculinity thing. Is this sort of like, I want this,
right,
but then like I'm not really cut out for it. And
yeah,
there's a certain kind of personality that I think can take that stuff very hard. It seems like he did.
absolutely. And we will, because of where we live now, the time we live in now, anybody coming up doesn't can't even possibly process what going from being unknown to famous would be like before the digital age, because everybody kind of has this glimpse of like, I'm going to make videos of myself and I'm going to put myself on YouTube or whatever. But to go from being somebody who one minute was hanging out with their friends and drinking wine in a New York loft and playing at Chenet, to suddenly having people think they know who you are or telling you who
Hmm.
you should be. Before, the internet and before we lived in this modern world, I can't imagine what that was like for delicate spirits.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it still happens to this day. There's still a delicate songwriter out there right now who's going to face that same feeling, but it's just a lot less. It's a lot less because we just are more familiar with what it means to be in front of the world from the time that we're born,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
that's disturbing when you put it that way.
Sorry. Yeah.
But yeah, and when you add AI on top of that, like I don't want to see AI slop videos of Jeff Buckley doing like pro wrestling and shit like
Oh
that.
God, this is really upsetting and very scary about like how I mean it's like I'm not one of those people who's saying we can't use AI, but the things that I'm seeing of like people who are dead being put into these videos and doing stuff, I'm like, oh my God, it's only funny to a point. We gotta be careful with this stuff.
I know. All day I've had friends sending me, have you seen this one? Have you seen this one? Like I just watched David Bowie wrestle Freddie Mercury.
It's just
I
like
just watched Martin Luther King Jr. doing stand up at like the Comedy Store.
yeah,
Like
it's like I don't know, you guys.
keep Jeff out of this.
Keep him out. Keep him out of
Yeah.
your AI.
Well, they mention it briefly in the documentary. This sort of it's funny because it's like this is the trend in rock is authenticity. The trend is guys that don't want to sell out,
Yeah.
and like and rock stars that are doing something a little bit different. They aren't pursuing fame, and it almost became a cliche of the era. And a performance, I think, for some of like this ambivalence towards fame. Like, I don't really want to be on MTV. Like, I don't care. Tom York was actually really good at that, and
Yeah.
so was Oasis.
Totally.
Um,
I don't care about fame,
yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
But for Buckley, it feels like that ambivalence feels authentic.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he like genuinely is like uncomfortable. It's so bizarre seeing the video where he's like, "I'm Jeff Buckley and welcome to 120 minutes," and I'm kind of like, he did stuff like this.
Yeah. Right.
He seems almost too fragile for any of
Yeah.
it.
Right. And so there was probably elements of that he did that day, left the studio and went and sat in his place and was like, I don't want to do that anymore. You know what I mean? Like just
Yeah.
braved it. So
I was, listening to Grace on I hate to say on Spotify. I do have it on vinyl, but I was listening to it in the car
that's
and
okay.
I don't have a
I do the
record
same.
player. I don't have a record player in my car, Jacob.
Yeah, I know. You need to get one. Don't you have the latest record
Yeah.
player in your car?
Vinyl in the car is the new analog culture thing,
That's the
maybe.
new goal. We need to have it. We need to create a thing that plays because you'd be the ultimate like hipster to literally have somebody get in your car and be like, "Can you flip the record for me?"
Flip the record, yeah, while you're driving. That's distracted driving.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, what's interesting to me is what the algorithm does with Grace. Like when you play it, like what it plays afterwards. Like
Oh, I don't know if I've experienced that. Of
so maybe
what
you
it,
can guess. Like
okay.
what would you suggest to someone who was like, "Oh, I love Grace. What else would I love that's like this?"
I mean, if they're gonna go in the 90s, like it's funny because I I was gonna say, would they do Elliott Smith as like a as a another singer songwriter with a tragic story, so the algorithm would glom on to that? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So, but give me an example
Oh,
of what
it went straight to Morrissey
Morrissey. Okay,
afterwards. Yeah.
okay.
But then just like, 90s rock.
90s rock. Yeah,
Eventually Dinosaur Jr. was there and stuff like that.
there you go. Jay Mascis, sure, just like Jeff Buckley.
Right, same guy. Um, well, I mean, now
Yeah,
that you say that,
yeah,
there's a certain kind of when you say masculinity, I think there's a key gender thing for me in the
yeah,
90s. And I say that in part because it's very recognizable when you describe yourself as like, yeah, I liked rock and I was in a Soundgarden, but I also was a theater guy. And I
yeah.
also liked stuff that was a little performative and stuff that would make other macho guys call me gay if I listened to it. You know what I mean?
Always,
Right?
always.
And
Hmm.
like that part of it where there wasn't really a space for like ostensibly straight men to cry while they're listening to this, Cats
Yeah,
or theater stuff or even Ben Folds 5. That was
right.
very important to me. Like that was
Yeah,
really, really key to me because I grew up with macho brothers who were sports guys they weren't listening to anything but stuff that affirmed how fucking hard of men they were. And for me
Absolutely.
to listen to the softer stuff, and I think, Buckley is partly, in that world of cutting out that space
Yeah.
for softer dudes, if that makes sense. And
That is absolutely accurate.
yeah,
Absolutely accurate because think about this. All of this movement, the alternative, what was called grunge, all of this. We went from hair bands, guys kicking in leather pants, to one day, all of these artists were talking about how depressed they were, how much pain they've been through, how they felt estranged from their father, how they had no father, how they were beaten. There, everything was just trauma forward. It was a bunch of men in these bands that were sharing and grieving and being emotional. So when you're a boy and you're like, I feel all these things, I feel all this stuff too, you felt a huge sense of validation. And so what was so challenging was you'd go to school and, you could cry to Pearl Jam's Black and then you'd interact with a dude who'd want to fight you who was cranking even flow. And you'd be like, I don't think you understand this band. You know what I mean? Like
yes,
you'd still have to deal with it. And then when new metal comes along in the late 90s, that's why a lot of us were really repulsed by it because it brought out, I mean, I enjoy some of it now because it's fun and I like heavy music, but it brought out the bros again. It
yes,
brought out the anger and it brought out guys who just, you're like, Jesus, man, like I don't need everything to be so macho and aggressive. And if anybody was to listen to this and they'd be like, oh, you're just a couple of softies. No, men have the worst mental health of anyone.
yeah,
So I think that the problem is that feeling this way and communicating this way is something that during the 90s we were really allowed to do with bands, with artists like Jeff Buckley and so many more. And thankfully now, in my teenager, it's not even an issue. They, like their
hmm
music landscape, you can just be about anything you want to be. But there's a reason why millennials and Gen Xers, you get to this age and you're like, I still have just this enormous heart. And it's because it stems back from that time where these artists really cracked open something inside.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's so key to why I'm still sort of unpacking the 90s music and that
Yes.
and that world. And I think it's key to your videos too, honestly, because your videos are about the feeling of listening to this music. And like the first time you heard this song, it was a revelation
Yeah.
because it cracked something open for you. You thought, this music actually showed me that the world could be different than the way I thought it was.
Yes.
Yeah, I just watched, I think, one of your biggest videos, which is about Rage Against the Machine,
Yeah.
and sort of like, I'm angry, but I'm learning.
Yeah.
Like that's so
It's a
funny.
funny
First of
line, but
all,
it's
yeah,
it's a funny line, but it was written in earnestness. You know what I mean? Like, of
yeah,
course I get the comedy, but I wrote that in earnestness, right?
yeah, yeah, and it feels like that you could be angry and learning at the same time because
Yeah.
honestly, just being an MTV kid in the 90s was a process of education for me. And it's weird because, you think of like, wow, was MTV just propaganda? I don't know how intentional all of it was. It was the artists themselves more than
Right.
MTV. Like MTV was following, what was popular.
Right.
But you ended up, I mean, it was even, I mean, I know you're a big Smashing Pumpkins guy, and like Billy Corgan totally embodies a guy that could be like a kick-ass rock guy, angry dude, but it's also like I used to be a little boy. You know what I
Right.
mean? That just
Right.
crushes you.
Right.
And like
Right.
it's so it I think I'm still chasing that feeling in a lot of ways
Absolutely.
because it opened up a possibility of being just accepted for who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to share. So my cousin John, he sent me this. This is relevant, I promise. He sent me this guy's stand-up special the other day, and I only watched like the first few minutes, but this guy said something that rocked me to my core. So it's a comedian by the name of Gianmarco Ceresi, and it's a special he has called Thief of Joy. And he starts out this routine and he's talking about trauma from our families and our parents as children, and he's talking about it, and he sets it up with this great story about like understanding that his home life is fucked up and all this stuff, and then he says right there, and he goes, "I'm 37 years old." And he goes, which is 10 years younger than I am. And he's like, I'm 37 years old. And people are always saying to me, they're saying, aren't you a little old to be blaming any of your shit on your childhood trauma with your parents? And he said, um, I'm going to botch it, but he says, do you feel safer on the 37th floor of a building with a fucked up foundation? And that for me,
Yeah,
really, I was like, that's a great joke, but that gave me chills
totally.
because every year you get older, and this visual metaphor of you being higher in the floors of a building where the bottom never got built correctly.
Ugh, what a metaphor.
Yikes. What a
Yeah,
metaphor, right? So you go, I'm 47 floors up from a building that has walls on the bottom that were never completed. And that's just to illustrate the idea of, look, I'm not saying I had an awful childhood, but there's definitely some stuff I didn't deal with, or stuff that was shoved down or hidden in the basement or never fixed. And to get full circle with what we talked about nostalgia earlier, there's a reason why you hear the thing and it makes you cry, because this building is getting, it's really having to deal with those things now. I
yeah.
have to, you know what I mean? I have no choice. And so the fact that we grew up as teenagers, as adolescents, the tumultuous time of understanding who you're gonna be, still being in the home of parents, and figuring shit out, and the fact that the most like popular music in rock and alternative was emotional pain, trauma, feelings, and it
Mhm.
wasn't pop nonsense. It wasn't like, oh, I like this girl. It was just so much heavier. And I really do think that's why a whole generation of us are just every day going, oh my God. Yeah.
100%. And to connect that to Buckley,
Yeah.
he what makes his stuff a little bit different for me, and I think so powerful now, is thinking about how it's really like long. His music on Grace feels like it's about longing
Hmm.
and beauty,
Hmm.
and it's not just about like I'm fucked up and I'm broken.
No.
It's instead like I don't know. I talked about this is a weird connection, but I talked about a Danzig record that came out
Hmm.
called the Danzig 2 Lucifuge. Yeah.
Lucifuge. Yeah, I know it.
Yeah. Yeah, so the opening song of that album, "Long Way Back from Hell,"
Yeah.
is a song that, for whatever reason, I had just been reading the week before the book Interview with the Vampire, and I'd never read Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire before, and I sort of like was struck by how romantic she made being a vampire sound. I was like,
Right.
wow, this
Right.
is like so beautiful. Like I'm crying over like this old vampire and how he's like cursed to drink blood the rest of his life. And there was something so beautiful and haunting about it. And
Yeah.
Danzig somehow made turn that into like a blues rock Doors song,
Totally.
And I feel like Buckley does the same thing in the sense of like he creates these with his voice and with the sound of the music. There's like a kind of gothic longing and romance to his sort of space that he's inhabiting. And there's something to connect that to the shattered masculinity that we experienced in the
Yeah.
90s. That is liberating in its own way. It's sort of like the pleasure of being and now I see why they connect Morrissey to him, because it's sort of
Yeah.
like the pleasures of being the kind of like forlorn gothic
Mhm.
guy. And I don't know if I would describe Buckley as goth, but it hits that register for me a little bit.
I think that's a good observation. Yeah, it was like when you started to say it, like almost Shakespearean,
Yes.
you cut to a scene in a Shakespearean times, right? And you have like the guy with the fluffy sleeves, and he's got the feather pen, and he's like crying as he's writing like a romance letter to his love that's in a tower.
Yes.
There is romantic. There is this feeling of a time where love is all there is. It's the only thing that you need to be concerned with is that do we love? Are we loved? And that notion is not something that everybody carries or communicates, but that really does come out of grace. That comes out. There is a longing, like you said. There's a sadness, but it's a beautiful sadness. It's only the sadness you would know if you loved and then lost.
Yeah.
All of it feels very, very Renaissance and just a time when art and beauty were all that mattered. And he really did have that.
I love that. And it feels like a religious act without
Hmm.
being overtly a Christian album. And that's another, I think, important space that was opened up by this album is
Hmm.
the idea, grace, we have hallelujah,
Hmm.
we have the Corpus Christi carol.
Corpus Christi Carol, yeah.
Yeah, these songs that are sort of evoking being in a church
Yes.
and worship.
Holy.
Yeah, but in a moment when, there were 90s rock stuff was very secular and was
Hmm.
very like, I remember the politics of the era being very almost, anti-Christianity, anti-church.
Sure.
They're the ones that fucked this all up. And I think
Yeah.
that's part of what makes Grace such a brave album is to like sort of, no, I'm going to go right into that and give you that in a way that sort of captures what's so necessary about
Hmm.
that without all the baggage that comes with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It has a holiness, it has a purity, and it has, but in a non-religious way, in a secular way, and in a way that it makes the God is love and beauty and the touch of a woman. And so there is, yeah, it's a very sensitive thing. So again, in American culture amongst males hitting puberty, no wonder it didn't land with most, because there's
Mm.
this, you have to have that sensitive boy gene like ready and able to go,
Yeah.
if you really wanted to invite it in.
And I mean, Hallelujah is the song that I think people most associate with him. It's the one that's got the most
Sure.
downloads. And not every teenager is ready for Leonard Cohen's
No.
sort of take on the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an example of a song. Now I love Leonard Cohen. I first discovered him. I knew of Leonard Cohen before I knew of Jeff Buckley, only because he was on the Pump Up the Volume soundtrack. When you would see
Oh,
that movie,
wow.
Christian,
Yeah.
yeah. So when you'd see the Christian Slater film, the opening theme of his radio show was "Everybody Knows," So I was always like, that song wasn't on the soundtrack, so I was a little obsessed with like, who's this grumbly old man's voice? I kind of love it, and then dove into his stuff. But Hallelujah, I gotta tip my hat to Mr. Cohen. Of course, he's the songwriter of it, but you got to admit that it's rare when a cover could be somewhat better than the original. And that's I'm no slight to Leonard. I'm a diehard Leonard fan, and may he rest in peace as well. But you got to admit that it was like someone took this really great, beautiful chord progression, this beautiful song, and handed it over to an angel, and the
Yes.
angel was like, "Let me take a crack at it."
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's like when
Totally.
we hear Hallelujah now, we're like, Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
pun intended, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's Buckley's song now. I mean,
it's
it's
yeah,
like the
yeah.
All Along the Watchtower with Hendrix and Dylan.
Dylan, exactly,
It's just
exactly. It's
and
like,
and it's such a. I mean, that's a song that is again speaking of singular feelings. If I hear that like in the grocery store, and I think you've made videos about like the grocery store moment where you hear something and you're like, oh fuck,
you're like,
like
oh no,
it's gonna do it to me.
yeah.
But I feel like you have to like stop. That song is not something you just like put on.
Mm-mm.
I mean, I listened to this album like 4 or 5 times in preparation for this podcast, and every time Hallelujah came on, it was a specific moment. It's sort of like I have to actually participate and
Hmm.
get into the register of the Hallelujah
Yeah,
because there's something he does. The combination of just the solo voice along with the solo electric guitar, his playing is just
it's it's
there's
it's
nothing like it.
it's otherworldly. And I was on a podcast a few years ago, and we talked quite a bit about that in particular. And we said, it's unfortunate because anything that's that good ends up getting played a ton. And there was a chapter there during American Idol where it was like every contestant was singing Hallelujah, and people can kind of rob something that's really good from you because it gets overplayed and gets played to death. And I was like, I don't think that I've ever allowed that one to get ruined for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I've really kept it safe. And I feel like if anybody was to put on Hallelujah, I would never be like, oh, I've heard this one too many times. I'd be like, no, 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 no. It's good every time. It's good
Yeah.
every time.
I agree,
Yeah.
100%. Well, yeah, and that that late 80s, 90s sort of bridge, I think people forget how it was an ugly time in rock and roll.
Yeah.
And that, I think it's probably we misremember in some ways how it was just all of a sudden Kurt Cobain came and saved us all from it. Although I think there was like a moment where like Guns N' Roses were like number one week, and then like it was, I
It
mean,
was a it was a
it
flip.
was sort of over
It
for
was a
the
flip of the
Sunset
switch.
Strip glam metal guys.
I think some people think that we're exaggerating when we tell that story. You know, like when people
Yeah,
who weren't there hear it, they go, "Oh, it couldn't have been like that." And I'm like, "Look, if you lived in Hollywood, probably it was a little bit more subtle because you still had the other guys around. But on MTV and on the radio, every radio station was suddenly clamoring to play a different style of music once that happened. And MTV, it was like, yeah, number one last week, Guns N' Roses, number one this week, Nirvana. And things really did shift dramatically and
yeah.
quickly, you
Yeah.
know?
And for
Yeah.
me, that was the bridge between junior high and middle school. So
Hmm.
you talk about emotional baggage. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
junior high was Guns N' Roses and
Oh,
Guns
yeah.
N' Roses kids on the playground,
Oh, totally.
all those assholes.
Yeah.
And then yeah, it's just over. What do you do with Guns N' Roses now, by the way? Do you ever listen to that stuff?
No, no. And
Or
that's the
cover
funny.
it in Temple of the Dads?
No, and here's the thing. I had Appetite for Destruction. I got Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. And so when before this moment really came out, I loved those albums and I love those records, but they haven't aged well for me over time. You know,
Yeah.
If Paradise City or Welcome to the Jungle came on at a party, of course I'd sing and had a great time, or Patience or whatever, because it brings back a lot of memories. But those guys represented, you know, a Jack Daniels bottle, a cigarette, arm around a babe in the dressing room, and really weren't connecting to me other than this rocks. And
Yeah.
that's a cool emotion. I don't mind it. I don't mind having the feeling of like this rocks. But boy, oh boy, I wasn't ready for what kind of journeys I would be on with all these other artists years later. And there's a reason why I'm sitting down and I'm putting on OK Computer or Grace or Siamese Dream or whatever, and they still hold up to this day, and I'm not reaching for GNR. But I did do a video not about 2 years ago. I did it for Don't Cry, because I was remembering how funny it was when he held the note really long at the end.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make fun of the fact that like we watched that video and those videos were like they looked like they were $100 million movies. And then also Shannon Hoon is like a brief cameo in that video, which was
That's
kind of
right.
cool. And
Yeah.
it was before the Blind Melon fame and before his death, of course. So I thought it was a cool one to touch on. But yeah, I don't go to them very much. Do you? Do you?
No,
Yeah.
not really. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's partly, first of all, when I looked at Axl Rose, I wasn't like, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
I'm this
Not me at
guy
all.
at all. Whereas there were some like, I don't know, mullet head kids I went to school with that were
Right.
probably looking at Axl Rose and be like, yeah, fuck yeah, that's like who
That's
I want
me,
to be.
man. That's me.
I mean, honestly, it was, and it's still true. I think I looked at Rivers Cuomo when the Blue album came out, and I was
You
like,
beat me to it.
that's me.
That
Yeah,
when the Blue album came out, I watched and I was like, "Oh, cool! I could do this stuff too." I'm
right.
like Rivers Cuomo.
Yeah, and I think it's important because, and I know we got to go here. I want to wrap it up, but like the idea of wanting to rock and thinking Guns N' Roses and Metallica and like that sort of stuff was cool. I love I love the emotion it let out, and I thought
Yeah,
those guys there was something cool about it for when I was 12 and 13. But as I got to be 15, like it was like I want to rock, but there's something I want to
yeah,
feel,
yeah,
and like that part of it was important. I feel so blessed, not to be corny, but so blessed to be coming of age in the early 90s when this music was there in pop culture to sort of give me a place to feel okay about like rocking out and not being a misogynist, homophobic douchebag. Yeah.
100%. And are you a guitarist too? I can't remember. Are you also a guitar
Yeah.
player?
Yeah.
So when I got my guitar and I first got it, it was before that music shift. And I remember I was listening to Metallica and I was listening to Megadeth and I was listening to Guns N' Roses. And I would buy the Guitar World magazines and I was so overwhelmed. I was so overwhelmed because I was like, I'm never going to be able to play like Marty Friedman or Kirk Hammett. I'm never going to be able to do that. And the one thing that the music shift gave us was it showed you could write a song, you could write music, and you don't have to be a virtuoso. You just need to know some basic chord progressions, and you just
Yeah.
need to know, you can, whether it's as simple as Green Day or it's more complex, like some of the more, Tool and things like that. It's more complicated riffs and difficult stuff. But it did open the door to the everyday human and go like, I could pick up a guitar and I could share my feelings and I could mourn the loss of something in your life, a girlfriend, a parent, something, and I could get rid of these feelings and I don't have to be so good. And I'm so thankful for that because
Yeah.
it made me feel like I'm okay to be me
Yeah. And
and
not Steve Vai
not
doing
Steve
like
Vai,
two-hand tapping and all that
Joe
shit. Yeah.
Satriani and Eric Johnson and all the people that I'd watch their videos and be like, maybe if I watch it 100 times, I'll know how to do it.
Well, yeah, we talked about that in a previous episode. We talked about Sonic Youth's Goo, which came out I think
Yes.
in May of 1990, and like
Yeah.
fucking Thurston Moore's guitar playing there is so like different than any of that Van Halen type shit,
So
and
weird.
yet he fucking shreds, and it's just like, yeah, I think he's just slamming the guitar against the wall at this
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
and it's just so cool, and
It's
I
so
think
cool.
that's part of it is like you can be cool and not just this guy, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it it really just it shifted the idea of what a cool person
What a
could be.
cool person
Yeah.
could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like you am so grateful and feel incredibly fortunate and that we can now, I don't know, we all finally get to talk about it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's funny because if I make a video and people go like, "Wow, did we all have the exact same experience around the globe?" And I think it's just because we didn't have the ability to talk to each other until now. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Since like we had these very like these little bubble communities where we thought we were the only ones going through it, but we were all going through the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
it's important and it led us somewhere. And I think you're right when you point out that the younger generation, I hope, benefits from it in some
Yeah.
way by even having parents,
Yeah.
by parents that listen to Jeff Buckley and Weezer.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean I saw evidence of it tonight. Our I will say I believe that this generation that are in their 40s, 30s, 50s, the way that we talk to our children is very different
Mm.
because we are very much more aware of emotions and what might be the challenges that they're going through, and it's raising an entire generation of kids that their emotional maturity, you're kind of like, wow, holy shit, I can't imagine having the depth to understand that at 16, and it's
Yeah.
it's it's wonderful to see.
Well, Jacob Gibbons, I'm so glad that Jeff Buckley's grace led us to this therapy session.
Yes, yes.
Because
We
yeah,
got heavy. We got heavy. And now we didn't cry, but I think our spirits shed some burdens, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I feel a weight lifted.
Yeah.
And yeah, for those that haven't checked out this documentary, it's called "It's
Wonderful.
Never Over," Jeff Buckley, and I watch it on streaming. You can rent it on like YouTube and Apple and stuff like that. It's really, really good, and it gives you a picture of this artist that is so much more complex than what I got from Wikipedia or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. It really
Yeah.
is the way to understand him in a 2 hour period of time. If you wanna understand this artist, watch the movie, and then when you're done, I guarantee you when you put on Grace, you're probably gonna love it 10 times more.
All right. So at some point, watch the Elliott Smith documentary, and we
I
can
will.
cry again together.
Okay. Hey, only bring me on for the crying
Yeah, I know.
ones. Just only the sad albums, please. Let's do
uh,
Damien Rice. Let's do some Tori
oh my
Amos.
God, Damian Rice. I
Oh yeah.
forgot.
Oh man.
God, what was that movie called? Closer?
Once. So
What?
right. It was Closer is the song that has Cannonball. That's what you were thinking of.
The
I'm sorry.
movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
With Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman that has the song there, Cannonball. I was thinking of there was an amazing acoustic singer-songwriter film called Once,
I
and
remember it. Yep.
Damien Rice was supposed to play the lead, so that's what I was thinking of there. It ended up being Glenn Hansard, but Damien Rice was supposed to be that main character, and that's what I thought you were
That's
talking about.
primo theater kid shit right there, too.
Primo theater kid shit.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jacob. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David. I had a great time. I hope your audience enjoyed it, getting in their feels.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to our little program. Check out all of our playlists, etc. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you next month.